Really? Thank you guys for stopping by. My name's Anthony. Thank you guys for stopping by. My name's Anthony Kitte, and today I'm going to show you how I built this white concrete table with plywood legs on avocations. Alright, to begin this build, I went to my local hardware store and bought a couple pieces of white face plywood and a fresh blade for my table saw. Also, heads up real quick, if you hear any beeps or boops, that's probably just my bird who's trying to join in on the recording session right now. Anyways, figuring out the measurements prior to cutting saved a lot of time and money, as I knew exactly how much material I needed. However, as you'll end up seeing, my plans did end up changing just a bit. I did begin with the legs. I know that I wanted them to be 3 inches wide, so I set my table saw fence to 4 inches, knowing I had enough material and also to account for any shifting in the glue up. And once I had all my leg pieces cut out, it was time for the glue up. I won't try to bore anybody with any footage of, gluing up and clamping, although I do love that part, and a lot of people, it's kind of boring. But if you do like it, I do have some coming up, so, just kind of stick around. Once everything was dry, I went and I cut everything to their true width. I just kind of took off the edge just to kind of make it like a nice flat face, and then I trued it into their 3 inches to, make it how I wanted it to be. After all the legs were cut to width, I cut them to the length of my miter saw. In my original drawing, the legs were a little shorter. However, I did have extra material, and I did want to make it just slightly taller since I am a bigger fan of bigger tables. This just worked out perfectly for me in the end. Also, if you do happen to have a stop block, use it, and if you don't, get one. This thing, for cutting all of these legs exactly the same size, this saved my life. I did need to cut these at an angle, so I just added a little bit of painter's tape to avoid the chipping. Since these were going to be kind of angle to angle, not the strongest joint, I did use some pocket holes to kind of hold everything together. I don't know, a lot of people like pocket holes, but I love them. They're super useful. They're not the sturdiest holds, especially in this type of situation where you just put glue to pocket holes in an angle and then it puts a lot of stress in this specific joint. It's not the best, but it was a risk I was willing to take. I did like the design a lot, so I wasn't really going to fret about it. And if it broke, it broke. But in the end, a little bit of spoiler alert, it did not break at all. I also used pocket holes to kind of hold the separators, stabilizers. I'm not sure what I call these. They hold the legs the same distance apart, and they help it not wobble. So, stabilizers. I don't call them stabilizers. I'm not quite sure. I did the exact same method. Anyways, I added some glue, some pocket holes, and I don't know. That wasn't the original idea, but I kind of didn't think it would be strong enough, and then it just kind of looked cool. And as a finish, I did use a wipe-on poly satin finish. It's just super easy to use. It makes the wood look great. There's no easier finish, honestly. For the tabletop, I kind of want to have an inlay within an inlay. So before I had to start with the first inlay, so I just used some Jatoba, I think that's how you pronounce it, and some maple. I cut them about, rough length, just whatever looked good to me. I didn't really have any plans for this. Just made sure they were the exact same size, width-wise, that way there wasn't, any disturbances in the glue up or in the table, because then it might look just, kind of strange. So for the design of how I wanted this inlay, originally I was wanting kind of a shield. I'm not sure why, but as you can see here, I was trying to design it out, but it was just going to look way too pointy. So I was like, well, what if I move forward and make it, a little smaller? But then I was like, well, this shape actually looks kind of neat. So I just decided to just leave it like that, no more cutting, keep it simple. I just had to make sure that everything was, level of each other, mark the little spots, and then it was time for the glue up. For the glue up, I had to make sure, of course they have an even amount of glue, but unfortunately I didn't have enough clamps that were long enough. I only have these bar clamps. It wasn't quite enough. I kind of wanted to make sure there wasn't any shifting. So as you can just see there, I used a lot of different clamps. I used my levels to make sure that there was no shifting. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of shifting when I took it out of the mold, and the maple just kind of rose a little bit, so I just used my hand plane just to kind of flatten everything out, and then, sander just to make sure everything was nice and smooth before I moved to the next part. Once everything was nice and smooth, I went ahead and I took the template that I printed. As some of you can recognize, this is the White Tree of Gondor. I couldn't really think of any cooler design, and we love Lord of the Rings, so I mean, we might as well. This, however, was the most painful process. It took hours. It was not a lot of fun. But after about 30-45 minutes of just cutting the outline, I went ahead and removed it, and then got a different bit, and then just started trying to just take chunks out of the middle. This took about another hour and a half, and it was just a super painful process. You just have to be super careful, and yeah. But as you can see here, I didn't do it quite deep enough, which for this part I think it would have made it a little bit easier. It did end up showing just a little bit, but for the epoxy I just used simple tabletop epoxy, added a little bit of white dye, made sure I mixed it thoroughly, and then I just added it in. This wasn't really, super difficult. I just used a stick to make sure that I have it in every corner. And I kind of shifted the board around before, it like set. And then once it's set, a few hours later, went ahead and sanded it, and then used the same finish that I did before, just a wipe on poly. This is by far the best part. You can just see all that wood grain pop, and just, I don't know. This just looks freaking awesome. But on to the next step of actually making the tabletop. First off, I used some melamine because it's waterproof resistant. I'm not quite sure what it is. All I know is that everybody uses it and it worked great for me. But after cutting it out, I know that I wanted it to be about 2 inches high, so I just made a bunch of 2-inch strips. And I knew that I wanted it to be 4 feet long. I didn't really have a preference on how wide it was, so I just used a piece of wood that I cut out and did the design in to make make it the width, because I didn't want the wood to kind of show at the edge of it. I don't know, I thought that looked pretty cool. But to hold it, I did also want to make sure it doesn't pop out, so I just added some bolts onto the piece itself, about 3 on each side, just so the concrete can hug and a little additional something. And also I just made sure that when I put it back in, flipped it over, pushed it down, and then added some paste wax and then some silicone, some black silicone. I mean, if you've seen videos like this, I'm sure you've seen the same process. You use a balling tool to just kind of round over the edges. I'm sure there's something else that you could do to kind of proof it. You could put some tape, but I mean, I kind of like this method because it just kind of rounds everything over and just looks a little nicer. For this concrete, I did not have a specific ratio for the mix. I picked up some white Portland cement, some play sand, some plasticizer, and some glass fibers. I also had to eyeball everything because I did have a scale where I had like a formula that I looked up, but it broke on me that very moment, like 2 minutes before this shot right here, actually. And so I just had to really eyeball it. In the end, it kind of turned out alright, except for this next part. I did not mix it well enough, and I'm sorry for this shot that's about to happen. And very smooth transition right here. Yeah, perfect. And what happened right there is I jumped it out. It was all dry. I had to dump it back in, put more water, and mix it up more, and then left this coat here, and it was a mess. Anyways, after that coat there, I let it dry for about 45 minutes, and then added the exact same mixture, but with the glass reinforced concrete, or I guess that's what you would call it when you add the glass. It kind of looks like oatmeal. It's very strange, but it makes it super sturdy. I had about 3 coats of this just to end up to the 2 inches that I wanted. But I mean, everything turned out great. What did happen though is I did push that first layer in a little bit too hard, and it did end up seeping a little bit under the wood. Here you can see, that everything looks great and fantastic. There's a little bit of white disparity. I mean, because I didn't mix it enough the very first time. But as you see here, as I was just saying, when I flip it, you can see on the corners that it kind of pooled over. This wasn't the end of the world. I just used this same grinding disc to make this kind of broken rock effect that I liked. And right here, I just patched it all up. And in the end, you could barely tell that it was there. I gave this a nice sanding before flipping it over again. I mean, I was going to do this again anyways, but I really just want to feel how it was. But this was an ungodly heavy piece of concrete. I think this thing weighed like 250 pounds or something. I'm not quite sure, but as you can see, I'm definitely struggling right here. It was, it was bad. But the next step was putting on the legs. I just had to go ahead and put it on, make sure everything was, leveled, everything looked good, and I just had to drill somehow, like, kind of pocket screws just like down into the concrete itself. This was not a big a deal, except one of them did kind of pop over, so I just had to patch it up with the same patching. I just went ahead and sanded everything down again, added one more coat of poly onto the piece itself, and it was done.
Thank you guys for watching this video. Absolutely loved building it. It was definitely a huge learning curve for me since I've never worked with concrete before. Nah, you're fine. But like, subscribe, share. Really, everybody's coming over? All right. Well, see you in the next project.